Magnum P.I.? Oh, I remember. Remember Terminator? Oh yeah, I love Terminator. I remember. Remember Day of the Dead? Remember Back to the Future? Oh, I remember. Remember New Coke? Oh, I remember New Coke. Yeah. Remember Ralph Macchio? Oh, I remember.
You gotta love so you gotta back it. Love doesn't tell how you don't grab it.
So, like any good American, I spent my 4th of July weekend binging Stranger Things 3. I got myself some Stranger Things themed ice cream from Baskin Robbins, the USS Butterscotch, and Eleven's Heaven, and a big old Byers House Polar Pizza to gorge upon as I gorged upon the new season. I was 100% all in on this, and it was mostly a good time, but something's been bugging me. It feels like this was the season where Stranger Things kind of jumped the shark, where we went from 80s nostalgia playfully remixed into full 80s excess. It felt like less of a pastiche of Steven Spielberg Amblin films to Stephen King novels, to more of a celebration of the excess that defined that era, but not for the better. While previous seasons of Stranger Things had been reverent to the culture, what made it work is that it still managed to carve out its new iconography that stood alongside the things that it was influencing. The Demogorgon is a generally unique monster design that, while similar to creatures from the 80s, is still unique to stand on its own. The upside-down parallel universe is something that's been seen in many kinds of movies, but it still had enough iconography to stand as its own sort of unique creation. And there were sort of rules that defined the Stranger Things universe. The evil military and the government experiments were taken very seriously, as was the monster. And the fact that this core set of kids were so enwrapped with nerd pastimes like D&D helped give them a context to better process the sci-fi shenanigans that were going on in their town. And it largely worked. But now we have complete Russian secret bases completely filled with commandos that exist on America right next to where the old American secret base used to be, and no one notices? Now, I'm not the kind of person who likes to complain about plot holes. I think that's kind of dumb. But what I do think is important is tonal consistency. I think once you've established a sort of set of rules for your universe, that usually it's in your best interests to sort of keep alongside those rules. And while those rules would occasionally be bent with kids fighting interdimensional monstrosities with a pocket rocket slingshot, and those rules were never quite broken as hard as Steve and Dustin sassing around a Russian military base while toting a spunky kid's sidekick. They should have been found and killed on sight, or at least they would have in the previous world of Stranger Things when Matthew Modine was running the government Black Ops. Because remember, in the first season, this was a world where when Elle encountered someone in a diner, they would get shot by the military. And now, the evil cartoon Russian commies are foiled by two intrepid teenagers dressed in a Scoops Ahoy outfit alongside their other kids' sidekicks. It's cartoon malarkey that kind of breaks the rules that we had before. And that's what Stranger Things initially was channeling. The idea of the 80s nostalgia and Americana mixed with the sort of Stephen King supernatural sci-fi horror. And that's what Stephen King does so well in many of his novels. He's sort of like the perverse Norman Rockwell, channeling a sort of tilted version of Americana, the sort of nostalgia we have for small town life, but showing the seedier underbelly of alcoholism, domestic abuse that hides just under the surface of suburban life. And usually there's some sort of supernatural metaphor channeling something science fiction-y or some Lovecraftian Cthulhu monster off in the distance, channeled through some folksy speak. And that's the sort of secret sauce that Stephen King has been mining for the past 30, 40 years. And to a lesser degree, it's what Stranger Things used to mine, until it became a total cluster. I mean, the final episode literally has a scene where the kids are being chased by a Tyrannosaurus-sized Cthulhu thing monster, which is great. I'm always partial to gross organic monstrosities. But then, amidst being chased, there is a 2-minute interlude where Dustin sings the never-ending story with his camp girlfriend. It's a very cute moment, but it's completely out of whack with everything else that is going on. And you could argue that after 2-3 seasons that maybe the kids are inoculated from strange going-ons with interdimensional monstrosities, but it's such a weird tonal shift to completely take away the stakes from the moment, which are pretty damn high. We've also reached a weird point where originally in the earlier seasons, you'd have things that were referenced, but now the things are referenced are actually like existing in universe. Like there's an entire subplot with this evil Russian guy who's designed to look like the Terminator, and they even have synth music that's reminiscent of the original Terminator movies. But this is also a world where the Terminator exists. So you have this weird thing where the pop culture is actually existing in the actual Stranger Things universe itself. It feels like we're 2 steps away from the kids building a DeLorean and going back in time to somehow stop the Mind Flare. And it feels like this season broke a lot of the sort of rules that were set up before. And it's funny to see the sort of evolution where now we're doubling down on all of the sort of worst things of 80s culture. At first, Stranger Things was great because it distilled the sort of sense of adventure and danger that people love from those sort of early Amblin movies that you never see in stuff today. You would never see something like Gremlins ever in a modern movie, where an old woman is thrown out of an electric stair lift. That's what people loved about 80s culture, that you have all this sort of iconography that wasn't reliant on regurgitating things and attempted to at least provide new iconography in genre films, science fiction, and fantasy. And that's what a lot of people lament about our current culture, which is so reliant on Disney making live-action remakes of their old animated movies. Literally an Ouroboros cycle of eating itself. That was the nostalgia that Stranger Things managed to conjure so effectively. But now, it seems like it's become a parody of itself. And in many ways, the evolution of Stranger Things also mimics the evolution of the Rocky movies. I'm sure you're all familiar with Rocky via cultural osmosis, just because it's so pervasive, but I bet a lot of you haven't seen any of the Rocky movies. I know I hadn't. I'd only seen parts of them. Well, a few years ago, I went to a marathon at the Alamo Drafthouse where they showed all 7 Rocky movies back to back. Let me tell you, that was a huge experience. They go very well together, telling the entire saga of Sylvester Stallone's careers. But what's really interesting is the jump between Rockies 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Rocky 1 and 2 are very gritty 70s movies. You might think that Rocky's this wholesome American hero, but in truth, Rocky is basically a mob enforcer who breaks the fingers of people who don't pay him enough money. He lives in a horrible, destroyed apartment that looks like it was a serial killer's den. The larger city of Philadelphia is a blazing hellhole, and it's just this element of gritty squalor and despair that defines the movie. The film has a great heart, but overall, the aesthetic of it is very gritty, grim, and depressing. So if you don't believe me about the first 2 Rocky movies, check out this little recut scene I did of Rocky and Adriana's first kiss, only adjusted a little bit to give you an idea of the sort of creepier context, as seen through today's light, that this original romance kinda has.
Why don't you come on over and make yourself comfortable, relax.
Do you have a phone?
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions. What's the matter? You don't like the room, do you?
It's fine. It's not that.
What's the problem? You don't like me?
I don't belong here.
Well, it's okay, because you're my guest.
I don't know you well enough. I've never been in a man's apartment alone.
Well, we're all the same,
I'm not sure I know you well enough. I don't feel comfortable. I should go.
Don't take off these glasses. Just take off that hat. I want to kiss you.
Rocky doesn't even become the champion in the first one. He just fights against Apollo Creed much longer than Apollo Creed thought he'd need to fight. He doesn't win. He just goes the distance and survives. Rocky 2 follows through with Rocky 1, where he actually does get a chance to win the championship, but we learn that the fame and success doesn't necessarily change who he is. Rocky's still a dumb joke-a-mook who has no idea how to exist in a more civilized society. He can't do commercials because he's damn near illiterate, and he doesn't know what to do with the success he has. And it's all about how does a blue-collar man exist in a white-collar world. How you can change a man's circumstances, but you can't change the man. But then, in Rocky 3, is overcome with the excess of the 80s. Just how Sylvester Stallone isn't the guy who did softcore porno to make ends meet.
I can assure you that everything you ever wanted to see of Sylvester Stallone can be seen in this new X-rated movie, The Italian Stallion. However, due to the mature content of this film, there are only 2 scenes we can show you acceptable for a G-rated preview.
Rocky is now a super celebrity, a movie star, with all the glitz and glamour that entails. He lives in a mansion, he lives with his wife and son, he lives in a glitzy gym, he lives the grandiose lifestyle of 80s excess and everything that entails. Which is of course why Mr. T kicks his ass, because Mr. T comes from the grim and grit that Rocky had originally come from as well. And then by the time Rocky 4 happens, it's basically a cartoon. Rocky defeats communism through the power of American punching. It's become a parody of itself. Something that had no sense of awareness, something that had completely indulged in the excesses of the era and lost its heart. And I feel like that's what Stranger Things became. So Rocky 4 basically became an unaware parody of itself and lost what made it great to begin with, what made the first an Academy Award-winning movie. And I feel that season 3 of Stranger Things has also become that as well. What was once a grounded coming-of-age story told with a slight tinge of the paranormal and cool monsters and all the genre stuff that we love from Stephen King is now a Saturday morning cartoon where our intrepid heroes go through a cartoony Russian base, battle evil commies, and fight gigantic flesh monsters like it's no big deal in between ballads of the never-ending story. But the funny thing is, as over-the-top and ridiculous as it's become, despite the fact that Hawkins has had 3 paranormal instances and people still don't seem to get on the same page so quickly after like the first or second episode, the reason that still makes it all tolerable is the characters. The characters are fun. Steve and Dustin are great to watch bounce off each other. And that's sort of the fundamental truth about media in general. That the hardest thing to get right is characters, but if you can get a good character done well, then you can get away with almost anything. And that's what Stranger Things does do well mostly. People like Mike, Dustin, Lewis, Elle, Hopper, Steve, and even newcomers like Robin managed to make a positive impression. And if you have good character dynamics of people just hanging around, you can get away with a lot, even if the story they're in tends to break the rules of what is plausible, or what should be plausible, defined by things previously. That's what's made the Marvel Cinematic Universe so successful. It's always been character-focused, it always puts getting this main superhero character right, and builds everything around that. Because they get that right, because it's always fun to see how characters bounce off each other, that's how it's become a $10 billion mega empire. And that's largely what keeps Stranger Things engaging. Unfortunately, it's gone past the point of self-awareness that I hope this is the last season. I hope that this is the end, despite the fact that the cliffhanger teaser implies that there's gonna be more, that we're gonna see these kids go through college and grow up, that eventually there'll be a Stranger Things Part 2, where once the kids are all grown up, they'll come back to fight against the upside down and the mind flare, just like Pennywise in the 90s or something. Which to me, I think at this point would be a terrible idea, given the fact that how much things have progressed, that we'll have Dustin build killer robots to fight the Demogorgon army, or something else that's equally as stupid. And that's the thing about nostalgia. It's great for our sort of remix culture to hit that dopamine hit of seeing something familiar, but ultimately, you have to remix it and you have to build something new from it. And if you're too slavishly devoted towards imitating the past, then you can't build a brighter future. And with the looming threat of Disney Plus on the horizon, I certainly hope this series either ends or figures out a way to go beyond with its own iconography that isn't so beholden on imitating the past forever. But at the very least, if you want the most American experience possible that has no political connotations, then I couldn't recommend going to Baskin-Robbins, getting your Stranger Things branded ice cream, and sitting down and going hog wild with the Binge Fest. It is probably the second most American thing, right behind pig races at the New Jersey State Fair. Much as the Stranger Things kids are growing up, getting into girls, moving away from nerdy interests, I hope this series, if it is to continue, will begin to forge its own path as opposed to being slavishly devoted to inserting references to the past, because it's way past time. You can only jump the shark so many more times. So those are my thoughts on Season 3 of Stranger Things. Let me know if you think I'm right or wrong in the comments below. Thanks for hanging around, and remember, lobster's antennas, but don't you grab it.